Summer laughter echoed through Marshallville in 1982, the kind of small-town peace that feels permanent until it shatters. 11-year-old Krista Harrison collected aluminum cans under festival lights, her smile wide, her future bright. Then she was gone, a beige van, a blur of motion. 3 days of searching that ended at a creek bed, wrapped in silence. For 2 decades, the man responsible hid behind a respectable job and a careful mask. Fibers smaller than human hair became the threads connecting innocence to evil. A survivor's courage reopened the door. A courtroom weighed science against doubt, and when the verdict finally came, it carried no triumph, only the heavy, fragile piece of truth delayed. How do you measure justice when 20 years have already passed? How do communities heal when the wound never fully closed? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The air smelled of kettle corn and summer heat. July 17, 1982. Marshallville, Ohio, spread lazy and content beneath an afternoon sun that painted everything gold. Festival banners snapped in the breeze. Children chased each other between vendor booths. Laughter rose and fell like music nobody bothered to name. Krista Harrison moved through the crowd with purpose. 11 years old, brown hair pulled back, freckles scattered across her nose like constellations. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder, collecting aluminum cans people left behind on picnic tables and beside trash bins. Every can meant a nickel. Every nickel brought her closer to the fair she'd been dreaming about all summer. Her friends waved from the dunking booth. She waved back, smiling that easy smile her mother would later describe as sunlight itself. The kind of smile that made strangers trust the world was still good. Near the edge of the festival grounds, a beige van idled in the gravel lot. The engine hummed low. Inside, a man watched. White, 30s, maybe early 40s. Clean-cut, unremarkable in every way except for the stillness in his gaze. 2 teenage boys noticed him. One nudged the other. "That van's been circling all week," the first boy said. His friend squinted at the license plate, memorized part of it without knowing why, just instinct. The kind of instinct that feels foolish until it matters. The man behind the wheel watched Christa bend to pick up a crushed soda can, watched her drop it into her bag, watched her glance toward the Ferris wheel, calculating how many more cans she needed. Then the van pulled forward, slow, deliberate. By dusk, the van was gone, and so was Christa. The Harrison home filled with voices that didn't belong there. Neighbors, police officers, volunteers, pulling on jackets even though the night was warm. Deborah Harrison stood in the kitchen doorway, her hands knotted together, her voice steady only because she forced it to be. "Christa," she called into the darkness beyond the porch light. "Honey," no answer, just crickets, and the distant rumble of search parties forming in the church parking lot. Detective Mark Hunsinger arrived at 8:30. He moved with the controlled urgency of someone who had worked missing child cases before, too many of them. His tie was loosened, his notepad already half filled with witness statements that didn't quite align. "She was collecting cans near the festival," Deborah said, her voice cracking on the last word. "She does that. She's responsible. She wouldn't just wander off." Hunsinger nodded. He believed her. Most parents of missing children told the truth. It was the world that lied. Flashlights bobbed through the fields behind the house. Someone found a shoe print near the park path, small, child-sized, pointing toward the road. Tire marks scarred the soft dirt where gravel met grass. Deep treads, wide spacing, the kind left by a large vehicle. A local mechanic knelt beside the tracks, ran his fingers along the impression. "Goodyear custom tread," he said. "Rare around here. You see that pattern mostly on vans, commercial types." Hunsinger wrote it down. Every detail mattered now. Every fragment could be the one that brought her home. Church bells rang across Marshallville at midnight. Not for celebration, for prayer. The entire town gathered in pews and held hands, and whispered the same desperate hope into the quiet. By sunrise, the search area had expanded into the woods. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through tangled brush, calling Christa's name until their voices went hoarse. The first missing child poster went up on a tree near the festival entrance. Christa's school photo stared out from the paper, smiling, trusting, already becoming memory. The Wayne County Sheriff's Office became a nerve center. Phones rang constantly. Tips poured in from across Ohio. Most led nowhere. A beige van seen in Canton. A suspicious man at a rest stop. Sightings that dissolved under scrutiny. Hunsinger worked with a sketch artist, piecing together a composite from the teenage boy's descriptions. White male, 30 to 40 years old. Average build, short hair. The kind of face that could belong to anyone. The sketch went out statewide. 80 calls flooded the hotline within hours. One stood out. "I saw a van like that," the caller said. "Few days ago, up in Akron, parked outside some office building." Hunsinger marked it. Akron was an hour north. Close enough to matter, far enough to complicate jurisdiction. Newspapers picked up the story. Front page, bold letters. 11-year-old girl missing, kidnapper at large. The media pressure mounted. Every news van that arrived demanded updates. Every update fed public fear. Parents started walking their children to school in groups. Playground swings hung empty, even during recess. Inside the investigation room, Hunsinger stared at the composite sketch pinned to the corkboard. The face stared back, generic, faceless. A ghost built from fragments of memory. He knew that face meant nothing yet, not without a name, not without evidence to match it to. 2 days, a deputy said from the doorway. We've got 48 hours before the trail goes cold. Hunsinger didn't answer. He was already past that deadline in his mind, already preparing for the worst. 2 days later, hope began to fade. July 20th, 7 in the morning. A fisherman walked along a creek bed in Holmes County, rod in hand, looking for a quiet spot away from the noise of search helicopters. He saw the sleeping bag first, wrapped tight, waterlogged, half hidden beneath willow branches. He didn't open it. He knew. Deputies arrived within minutes. The coroner followed. By the time Hunsinger got there, yellow tape surrounded the scene, and the quiet had turned unbearable. Inside the sleeping bag lay Krista Harrison. The autopsy confirmed what everyone feared: sexual assault. Strangulation. Time of death estimated within hours of her abduction. She had been gone before the first search party even formed. The sleeping bag became evidence. Sears brand. Discontinued model from the previous year. Limited distribution. Traceable. Maybe, if they could find the purchaser. Fibers clung to Krista's clothing. Orange acrylic strands. Gray carpet fragments. Dog hairs. Invisible to the naked eye but vivid under the microscope. Each one a silent witness. Candlelight vigils lined Marshallville's streets that night. Neighbors who had prayed for her safe return now mourned her stolen future. Deborah Harrison stood among them, a locket clasped in her trembling hand, unable to speak. The case shifted. No longer a search. Now a homicide investigation. The coroner's timeline crushed the last fragments of hope anyone had been clinging to. Christa had died quickly, mercifully, if mercy could exist in such horror. But that small comfort felt like dust. Hunsinger stood at the creek as deputies carried the body away. The water rippled. Indifferent. Birdsong continued overhead. Life moved forward even when it had no right to. He made a silent promise to the creek, to Christa, to every parent waiting for answers. This wouldn't go unsolved. The Akron Crime Lab became a cathedral of science. Fluorescent lights hummed. Microscopes lined the workbenches. Forensic analysts bent over slides, examining fibers one strand at a time. Orange acrylic. The color struck Dr. Susan Weller immediately. Bright, synthetic, the kind used in vehicle upholstery during the late 70s and early 80s. She cataloged every fiber recovered from Krista's clothing, measured them, photographed them, compared them against databases of commercial fabrics. Orange interior, upholstery, she told Hunsinger when he called. Not common. You're looking for a van with custom interior work. Gray carpet strands told another story. Older, worn. The kind of industrial carpet used in cargo areas. Dog hairs added another layer. Mixed breed, medium length. Someone owned a pet. Someone who didn't bother cleaning their vehicle thoroughly. Each detail narrowed the field. Each thread became part of a larger tapestry. But the lab was backlogged. Budget cuts had reduced staff. Cases piled up. Evidence sat waiting for weeks before analysts could process it fully. Local television stations ran warnings. Keep children indoors. Don't talk to strangers. Lock your doors. The town that had felt safe now felt like a trap. By August, the van sighting had become Marshallville's obsession. Every beige vehicle drew stares. Neighbors reported each other. Fear turned inward. Corrosive. Hunsinger pinned a fabric sample beside Krista's photo in the investigation room. Orange against her smiling face. A connection waiting to be completed. September brought cooler air and a grueling canvas. Police checked every registered van owner in Wayne, Holmes, and Summit counties. Hundreds of vehicles, hundreds of alibis. Most cleared within minutes. One man's van matched the color but not the tire tread. Another had the tread, but the wrong interior. The puzzle refused to align. Then, a neighbor mentioned something offhand during a routine interview. There's a van like that parked outside the city planning office sometimes. Up in Akron. I see it when I drive past. The officer took down the detail, passed it to Hunsinger. City Planning Office, Akron. Registered to an employee named Robert Anthony Buell. The name went into the file. Not a suspect yet, just a lead among dozens. Parents in Marshallville began escorting children to school in groups. Classroom windows stayed locked even during warm afternoons. Recess monitors counted heads twice before letting kids back inside. The case cooled with winter. Snow covered the ground where Christa had last walked. Evidence boxes labeled Harrison sat unused in the sheriff's storage room, waiting for the break that might never come. Hunsinger drove past the festival grounds on his way home some nights. Empty now, quiet. He thought about the cans she'd been collecting, about the nickel dreams that had led her into a predator's path. He kept her photo on his desk, a covenant, a reminder that some cases don't get to stay cold. March 1983, 9 at night, an Akron suburb. A teenage girl walked home from a friend's house, her breath fogging in the cold air. A beige van pulled alongside her, slow. The window rolled down. "Need a ride?" the driver asked. She glanced at him, middle-aged, clean-cut, unremarkable. "No thanks," she said, walking faster. The van kept pace. "It's cold out," he said. "I'm heading your direction." She ran. He followed. The van door opened. She heard footsteps behind her. Felt hands grab her jacket. She screamed, fought, tore free, sprinted toward a house with lights on, and pounded on the door until someone answered. Police arrived within minutes. The girl described the man, the van, the license plate digits she'd glimpsed before running. The description matched the Marshallville witnesses. The plate digits matched those seen near the festival. Ohio headlines screamed the next morning. "He's back." Detectives from multiple jurisdictions convened. Evidence compared. Witness statements aligned. The pattern emerged clear and undeniable. Days later, Hunsinger stood outside Robert Anthony Buell's door. 2 other officers flanked him. The neighborhood was quiet, respectable, tree-lined streets and neat lawns. Buell answered on the second knock. Pressed shirt, calm eyes, the kind of man who looked like he belonged exactly where he was. "Can I help you?" he asked. April 1983. The search warrant came through based on the attempted abduction case. Probable cause established. Legal boundaries met. Hunsinger entered Buell's residence with a forensic team. The house was tidy, almost sterile, everything in its place, no clutter, no chaos. The beige van sat in the driveway, orange interior upholstery, worn gray carpet in the cargo area, Goodyear custom tires. Inside the house, they found restraints, tape, rope, sleeping bags stored in a hall closet, same brand, same model. Dr. Weller processed the van personally. She collected fiber samples from the seats, the floor mats, the cargo area, sealed each one in evidence bags, labeled them with meticulous care. Under the microscope, the fibers told their story. Orange acrylic strands from the van's upholstery matched those found on Christa's clothing. Gray carpet fibers identical in composition and wear pattern. Dog hairs from Buell's pet shepherd. One fiber recovered from Christa's shorts matched Buell's living room carpet at the microscopic level. Every parameter aligned. Color, diameter, dye composition, manufacturing striations. The evidence went to the grand jury. Months of preparation. Witness testimony. Forensic reports stacked inches thick. Public shock rippled through Akron when the arrest became public. An Akron city planner? Professional facade with the accusations. Trust cracked. Authority no longer felt safe. Defense lawyers immediately claimed contamination, evidence mishandling, chain of custody violations. They filed motions, demanded suppression hearings, fought every inch. The van sat impounded in the police lot. Silent. Central, the physical manifestation of horror hidden in plain sight. January 1984, pre-trial hearings filled the Summit County Courthouse. Attorneys argued over evidence admissibility, technical debates about microscopic analysis, chain of custody logs examined line by line. Dr. Weller testified about her fiber comparison methodology. She explained how fibers were collected, preserved, analyzed, how each sample was photographed at varying magnifications, how databases of commercial fabrics provided comparison baselines. "These fibers are indistinguishable in all tested parameters," she said, her voice steady. Color, diameter, cross-sectional shape, dye composition, manufacturing characteristics. The probability of finding such matches by coincidence is astronomically small. Defense attorney Michael Keating cross-examined her carefully. He questioned the reliability of fiber analysis, cited studies suggesting microscopic comparison couldn't achieve certainty, called it junk science. Dressed in technical language, talk radio split. Some listeners believed the science. Others demanded DNA evidence that didn't yet exist in practical form. The debate turned philosophical. What constituted proof? How certain was certain enough? Judge Harold Moffett presided with measured dignity. He reviewed the case law, heard arguments from both sides, ruled that fiber evidence met the threshold for admissibility under existing forensic standards. The trial date was set for spring. Outside the courthouse, Deborah Harrison held her husband's hand. Reporters surrounded them. Cameras flashed. "We're ready," she whispered. Not to the media, to herself, to Christa's memory. The wheels of justice had taken 20 months to reach this point. She wondered how much longer healing would take, if healing was even possible. April 1984. The courtroom felt heavy. Dark wood paneling absorbed sound. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Spectators packed every bench. Jury selection took days. 12 people chosen to carry the weight of judgment. Their faces reflected the burden already. Prosecutor Linda Frey stood to deliver her opening statement. She wore a simple suit, no theatrics. Just steady, methodical presentation. The evidence will show a clear pattern, she said. Physical evidence linking the defendant's vehicle to the victim. Fibers, carpet strands, dog hairs. Each one a thread connecting Robert Buell to Krista Harrison's murder. She outlined the timeline, the abduction, the discovery, the forensic analysis, the attempted abduction that broke the case open. Keating countered with reasonable doubt. He emphasized the lack of eyewitnesses, the absence of DNA evidence, the reliance on fiber analysis that he characterized as imprecise and prone to error. Science must be certain, he told the jury. Lives depend on that certainty, and the prosecution's case rests on threads thinner than human hair. Witnesses from Marshallville testified next. They identified Buell's van in photo lineups, described seeing it circling the festival grounds. One teenager recounted memorizing the partial plate. Media vans lined the street outside. Reporters broadcast live updates every hour. The trial became regional news, then national. Buell sat at the defense table, expressionless. He watched the jurors closely, made notes on a legal pad, never showed emotion, never looked away. By week's end, the prosecution prepared to call their forensic expert. Dr. Susan Weller took the stand with quiet confidence. She had testified in dozens of trials, but this one felt different. Heavier. Frey guided her through the technical details. How fibers are collected from crime scenes. How microscopic analysis works. How comparison databases help establish uniqueness. We recovered over 100 fibers from the victim's clothing, Weller explained. 12 showed conclusive matches to materials found in Mr. Buell's van. She showed the jury photographs, magnified images of orange acrylic strands, side-by-side comparisons. The similarities were striking even to untrained eyes. These aren't just orange fibers, she said. These are identical in every measurable way. Manufacturing process, dye batch, wear patterns, cross-sectional geometry. She described the dog hairs found on Krista's shorts, how they matched samples from Buell's home, how such transference indicated direct contact. The courtroom leaned forward. Jurors studied the photographs. Some took notes. Others simply stared. Keating's cross-examination was surgical. He questioned contamination risks, asked about handling procedures, suggested that fibers could transfer during evidence collection. Dr. Weller, isn't it true that fiber analysis cannot provide absolute certainty? All forensic science deals in probabilities, she replied. But when 12 separate fibers all match across multiple parameters, the probability of coincidence becomes infinitesimal. Infinitesimal, but not impossible. In practical terms, impossible. Public opinion began to shift. The science felt compelling, the matches too specific to dismiss. The next morning, Frey called the surviving victim to testify. The courtroom went silent. The teenage girl walked to the witness stand slowly. Her hands trembled. She wore a simple dress. Her mother sat in the front row, crying quietly. Frey's questions were gentle. The girl described the night in March, the van pulling alongside her, the man's voice, the moment she ran. Can you identify the man who tried to abduct you? Frey asked. The girl looked across the courtroom. Her eyes met Buell's. That's him, she said. Her voice, barely above a whisper, but certain. She described his voice, how it had sounded friendly at first, then insistent, then threatening when she refused. The same voice I heard that night, she said. Keating objected. Voice identification is notoriously unreliable. Judge Moffat allowed the testimony but instructed the jury to weigh it carefully. The newspapers ran with it anyway. Pattern of predation, the headlines read. The girl's testimony lasted 2 hours. By the end, several jurors were crying. The emotional weight pressed down on everyone in the room. Keating's cross-examination was brief. He knew better than to attack a survivor too aggressively, but he planted seeds of doubt about memory, about trauma's effect on perception. As closing arguments neared, the case teetered on a knife's edge. Science versus doubt, pattern versus coincidence. Frey prepared her final piece of evidence, the one that would tip the scale. A state lab memo surfaced during evidence review. Recent, dated just weeks before trial. A new microanalysis technique had been applied to the fiber evidence. The results confirmed what Dr. Weller had testified to, but with additional specificity. The orange fibers from Krista's clothing and Buell's van were microscopically identical, down to manufacturing batch markers invisible under standard analysis. Frey presented the memo to the court. Judge Moffat admitted it over Keating's strenuous objections. The scientific certainty solidified. The matches weren't just probable, they were definitive within the limits of existing technology. Outside the courthouse, Crowds gathered. Some held signs. Justice for Christa. Others prayed. The community's pain had found focus. Keating demanded a mistrial. Claimed the late evidence disclosure violated discovery rules. Accused the lab of tampering to strengthen a weak case. Judge Moffat reviewed the documentation carefully. Found no procedural violations. The analysis had been conducted as part of ongoing quality assurance. Its timing was coincidental, not strategic. Motion denied, he said. The jury prepared for final arguments, the weight of decision settling over them like fog. Frey whispered to herself as she reviewed her closing statement. This is the moment she gets her voice back. Krista's voice, filtered through fibers, through science, through the careful accumulation of evidence that refused to let her be forgotten. Frey's closing argument was methodical. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence: the van, the fibers, the attempted abduction, the timeline that connected them all. Robert Buell hid behind respectability, she said. A city planner, a professional, someone who looked like he belonged in every room he entered. But the evidence doesn't lie. Fibers don't fabricate stories. Science reveals what deception tries to conceal. She held up enlarged photographs of the fiber comparisons, pointed to the matches, explained again how probability worked in their favor. 12 separate matches, each one independently verified. The odds of coincidence don't just strain credibility, they shatter it. Buell's work travel logs placed him near Marshallville on July 17th. No alibi, no witnesses to contradict the timeline. Keating's closing focused on reasonable doubt. He acknowledged the evidence but questioned its interpretation. Fiber analysis is not DNA, he reminded the jury. It cannot tell you with absolute certainty that these fibers came from this specific vehicle. It can only suggest probability. And in a system that demands proof beyond reasonable doubt, suggestion is not enough. He emphasized the lack of eyewitnesses, the absence of any direct evidence placing Buell at the scene. You must be certain, he said, completely certain. If you have any doubt at all, your duty is clear. Local bars fell silent as news spread that deliberations were beginning. People gathered around televisions, waiting. The jury retired. At dawn, the deliberation room was small, windowless. The fiber evidence spread across the table. Photographs, lab reports, microscope slides under portable magnifiers. 12 people examined the same evidence that had consumed the trial. They reviewed witness statements, studied the timeline, debated probability and certainty. One juror picked up a magnifier, studied the van's carpet pattern in the exhibit photos, the distinctive weave, the specific wear marks. "I've never seen anything like this," he said. "This specific pattern, in this specific condition." Others nodded. The technical evidence felt overwhelming, but doubt lingered. What if the fibers transferred during evidence collection? Another juror asked. What if someone contaminated the samples? They reviewed the chain of custody logs, every signature, every timestamp. The procedures appeared sound. Outside, rain began to fall. The community waited, praying, hoping, fearing what verdict might come. One juror refused to convict without DNA. "Fiber analysis isn't certain enough," she insisted. "We're talking about a man's life." The foreman read aloud from Dr. Weller's testimony, explained probability again, showed how 12 independent matches created geometric certainty. "Individually, maybe you doubt," he said, "but together? All 12? That's not coincidence. That's truth." By the third day, exhaustion set in. Emotions ran high. But slowly, consensus formed. The foreman knocked once on the deliberation room door. The bailiff opened it. "We have a verdict." The courtroom filled within minutes. Spectators squeezed into every available space. News cameras positioned themselves outside, waiting for the announcement. Judge Moffat entered. Everyone stood. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked. The foreman stood, held a folded paper. His hand shook slightly. "We have, Your Honor." Silence pressed down. Absolute. Suffocating. "On the charge of aggravated murder, we find the defendant, Robert Anthony Buell, guilty." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Deborah Harrison collapsed into her husband's arms. Tears came. Not relief, not celebration. Just the exhausted weight of truth finally acknowledged. Buell showed no reaction. His face remained calm, unreadable. Even the bailiff standing beside him felt unnerved by that stillness. The sentencing phase began immediately. Frey presented evidence of predatory intent, the pattern of behavior, the calculated nature of the crime. The jury recommended death. Judge Moffat scheduled formal sentencing for the following month. Buell was remanded to custody. As deputies led him away, he glanced once at Krista's parents. No apology, no remorse. Just that empty, unsettling calm. Television stations broke into regular programming. Death penalty, recommended in Harrison murder. Keating promised appeals. "This isn't over," he told reporters. But for Deborah Harrison, something had ended. Not healing, not peace. Just the agonizing uncertainty that had consumed 2 years of her life. She clutched her locket, the one holding Krista's photo. Tears fell silent and endless. Robert Buell's attorneys filed appeals before the ink dried on the judgment. They claimed improper evidence handling, challenged the fiber analysis methodology, argued that Keating had provided ineffective counsel. Every legal avenue explored. Courts re-examined the chain of custody, reviewed how evidence was collected, stored, analyzed, found no procedural violations. The forensic work met professional standards for the era. Fiber reliability precedents were affirmed. Multiple appellate courts upheld the conviction. True crime television shows began featuring the case. Forensic science programs used it as an example of pre-DNA investigative success. Christa's story spread beyond Ohio, but for Buell, the appeals process became routine. Years passed. Motion after motion denied. He settled into life on death row, maintained his innocence in letters to reporters, never showed remorse, never admitted guilt. The decades accumulated. The 1980s became the 90s. Technology advanced. DNA testing transformed criminal justice. But Buell's appeals continued to fail. No new evidence emerged. No procedural errors were found significant enough to warrant reversal. In his cell, lights clicked off each night at the same time. Routine replacing freedom, time becoming something measured in appeals rather than years. Somewhere in Ohio, Deborah Harrison kept Krista's room unchanged. The bed made, stuffed animals arranged on shelves. A shrine to a childhood stolen. Justice had spoken, but it couldn't give her daughter back. 1993. A journalist requested an interview with Buell. He agreed, perhaps seeking sympathy, perhaps simply craving attention. He sat across from the camera, calm and articulate. Denied owning the sleeping bag found with Christa. Claimed the fibers were coincidental, suggested evidence had been planted. I didn't kill that girl, he said, no emotion. Just statement presented as fact. Prison letters he'd written over the years revealed no remorse, only attempts at control, manipulation dressed as reasonable doubt. Television viewers watched the interview, debated his guilt. Some believed his calm denials, others saw a practiced liar. Krista's family refused to engage. They had heard the verdict, seen the evidence. Nothing Buell said could change what the jury concluded. The millennium approached. DNA testing began solving cold cases that had languished for decades. Technology that would have transformed Buell's trial now existed, but his appeals had exhausted themselves through traditional channels. A television flickered in the cell block. News coverage of DNA exonerations. Men walking free after years of wrongful imprisonment. Buell watched, perhaps hoping, perhaps calculating new appeal strategies, but his case remained unchanged. The fiber evidence stood. The conviction solid. Outside, the world moved forward. Technology advanced. Justice systems evolved. Inside, time stretched elastic and meaningless. 2001. DNA retesting swept through Ohio's prison system. Old cases reopened. Evidence re-examined with technology that could finally provide absolute certainty. Investigators pulled evidence from Buell's case files. The Krista Harrison murder had preserved some biological material but not enough for conclusive testing. Time and storage conditions had degraded what little existed. But another case connected to Buell, the murder of Tina Harmon, had preserved better samples. The DNA results cleared him. The profile didn't match. Someone else had killed Tina Harmon. The revelation sparked debate. If Buell was innocent of one murder, could he be innocent of others? Defense attorneys filed new petitions, demanded retrials, argued that the Harmon exoneration cast doubt on all previous convictions. But Krista's case remained scientifically unchanged. No DNA evidence existed to test. The fiber analysis stood alone. 12 matches, microscopically identical. Public opinion divided. Some demanded his release. Others pointed to the pattern of behavior, the attempted abduction, the van, the fibers. The appeals court reviewed the Harmon DNA results, acknowledged the exoneration, but ruled it did not impact the Harrison conviction. Each case must be evaluated on its own evidence, the ruling stated. A year later, Buell's execution date was set. A folded clemency petition returned to his attorney's office, unopened. Denied. September 2002. Southern Ohio Correctional Facility prepared the execution chamber. Protocols reviewed. Witnesses notified. Buell spent his final days giving interviews, maintaining innocence, claiming injustice. I did not kill that girl, he told reporters through the glass partition, his voice steady, his eyes meeting the camera without flinching. Protesters gathered outside the facility, half praying for his soul, half demanding justice be served. The moral divide between punishment and vengeance exposed in signs and chants. Inside, the warden read the execution order, legal language that reduced a life to procedure. Deborah Harrison was asked if she wanted to witness. She declined. I just want it to be over, she said. But other family members attended. They sat behind glass, watching as Buell was led into the chamber at 10:30 in the morning. He made no final statement, no apology, no admission. The lethal injection protocol began. Medical procedure dressed as justice. At 10:42, a physician pronounced him dead. The news spread quickly. Justice, 20 years later, read the headlines. But the word felt hollow. Justice couldn't restore what was lost, couldn't give Christa back her future, couldn't heal the wound that had never stopped bleeding. A tearful juror spoke to reporters afterward. "We had no doubt about his guilt," she said, "but no peace either." The nation debated the ethics, capital punishment, certainty without DNA, the cost of finality. Weeks later, the Harrison family planted a tree in Marshallville's Memorial Park, a sugar maple, the kind that turns brilliant red in autumn. A plaque was installed at its base, Christa's name, her dates, a brief inscription about innocence and memory. The town gathered for the dedication. Neighbors who had searched for her 20 years earlier, now older, grayer, still carrying the weight of that summer. Deborah Harrison spoke briefly. Her voice still cracked when she said her daughter's name. "She loved summer," Deborah said. "She loved people. She believed the world was good. I want this tree to remind us that goodness still exists, even after darkness." The tree swayed under autumn wind. Red leaves scattered across the grass like remembered laughter. The years that followed brought change. Ohio revised its child abduction response protocols. Amber Alert systems evolved partly from lessons learned in cases like Christa's. The delays that had cost precious hours now triggered immediate statewide notifications. Forensic standards advanced. What had been cutting-edge fiber analysis in the 80s became foundational science. DNA testing became routine, but investigators acknowledged that fiber evidence had solved cases when nothing else could. Training programs used Christa's case as a teaching example, how physical evidence builds a narrative, how patience and precision can overcome the absence of witnesses. Marshallville's annual fair began with a memorial speech every July, a moment of silence for the girl who had collected cans there 40 summers ago. Children who never knew her listened to the story, learned about stranger danger, about community vigilance. But the memorial wasn't about fear, it was about remembrance, about refusing to let time erase what mattered. In 2003, investigators confirmed that Buell's fibers had been linked to multiple unsolved cases across Ohio, girls who had vanished, bodies found with similar evidence. Cases that might have been prosecuted if time and resources had allowed. The revelation brought no comfort, only the haunting knowledge that justice delayed had cost more than anyone could calculate. Technology continued advancing. By 2010, DNA databases could identify suspects from microscopic samples. The science that had seemed impossible during Buell's trial now felt routine. 2010, a lab technician opened a sealed evidence bag marked Harrison K. 1982. The contents had been preserved in climate-controlled storage, part of a comprehensive review of historical cases. Modern DNA testing was applied to every recoverable sample: hair fibers, biological material, anything that might yield a profile. The Harrison case had limited biological evidence. What existed had degraded over nearly 3 decades, but technicians extracted what they could. The DNA review confirmed something investigators had long suspected. The Tina Harmon case, the one that had cleared Buell, involved a different perpetrator entirely. That exoneration stood, but Christa's case remained unchanged. No DNA evidence contradicted the fiber analysis. No new suspects emerged. The science that had convicted Buell in 1984 remained the only science available. Media outlets revisited the story. DNA review leaves Harrison case unchallenged, read the headlines. Ethicists debated the implications. Could justice ever be certain without DNA? Should fiber evidence alone support capital punishment? The conversations were philosophical now, abstract. Buell had been executed 8 years earlier. The question was no longer about his guilt, but about the system that had judged him. Some called it a cautionary tale. Others called it proof that good police work could overcome technological limitations. Deborah Harrison didn't comment publicly. She and her husband had moved to a smaller house years earlier. Christa's room packed into boxes. The memorial tree, their only remaining shrine. By 2015, both parents had passed. Natural causes. Age and grief compounded over decades. They died believing the right man had paid for their daughter's murder. Present day. Marshallville Memorial Park. Sunset paints the Ohio sky in shades of amber and rose. The sugar maple has grown tall. Its branches reach wide, providing shade for picnic tables and playground equipment. Children play beneath it, unaware of the story written in its roots. The memorial plaque has weathered, bronze darkened, but the inscription remains legible. Krista Lea Harrison, July 17, 1982. Gone but not forgotten. 40 years have passed. The festival still happens every summer. Kettle corn still fills the air with sweetness. But parents watch their children more closely now. The innocence of that earlier time feels impossibly distant. Case files have been transferred to the Ohio Historical Archive, preserved for researchers, for students of forensic science, for anyone trying to understand how justice worked before DNA transformed everything. True Crime Podcast discovered Krista's story in recent years. New listeners weep for a girl they never knew. The episodes dissect the evidence, debate the ethics, question whether certainty existed or merely confidence dressed in scientific language. Some investigators who worked the case have retired, others have passed. Detective Hunsinger died in 2012. He kept Krista's photo on his desk until his final day, a covenant honored to the end. Dr. Susan Weller continues to testify as an expert witness. Now in her 70s, she speaks at conferences about the evolution of forensic science, always mentions Krista when discussing the pre-DNA era. The surviving victim, the girl who escaped Buell's grasp, lives quietly somewhere in Ohio. She never gave media interviews, never sought attention. Her testimony helped convict a predator. That was enough. The juror who spoke after Buell's execution still struggles with what certainty means. No peace, she had said. The words haunt her decades later. She followed the DNA reviews, read every article about fiber evidence reliability, studied the advancements that might have changed the verdict or confirmed it beyond any philosophical doubt. The science never contradicted what she and 11 others decided in 1984, but the question persists. In a case without DNA, without eyewitnesses, without confession, how certain is certain enough? She visits the memorial tree sometimes, sits on a bench nearby, watches children play, wonders if Krista would have had children of her own by now, grandchildren perhaps. The arithmetic of stolen time never balances. 11 years of life, 40 years of absence, the math refuses to resolve. Evening descends on Marshallville. The last festival visitors head toward parking lots. Vendors pack up kettle, corn machines, and cotton candy spinners. The sounds fade as darkness settles. The memorial tree stands silhouette against the deepening sky. Its branches sway in the breeze. Leaves whisper stories that no one can quite hear but everyone somehow understands. Justice arrived 20 years late. It came through fibers smaller than human hair, through microscopes and methodical investigation, through a survivor's courage and a community's refusal to forget. But justice couldn't restore what was taken, couldn't give back the summers Krista never saw, couldn't heal the wound that time only partially closed. The camera drifts upward from the memorial tree, past the branches reaching toward dusk, past the fading light. Somewhere in the archives, case files rest in climate-controlled silence. Photographs of fiber comparisons, lab reports written in careful technical language, witness statements preserved on yellowing paper. The evidence tells a story. 12 fibers matched. A van with orange upholstery. A man who watched children at festivals. A pattern that emerged only after another girl ran fast enough to escape. The story answers the question of who. Science provided that much. Robert Anthony Buell, city planner, predator, the man whose calm facade hid calculations measured in stolen innocence. But some questions remain unanswered. How many others? Which cases that went cold might have been his? What evidence was lost to time before investigators made the connections? The DNA exoneration in the Harmon case proved Buell wasn't responsible for every crime attributed to him, but it never touched Krista's case, never challenged the fibers, never offered an alternative suspect. Truth exists somewhere between absolute certainty and philosophical doubt. The fiber evidence was as good as science could offer in 1984. Whether that reached the standard of beyond reasonable doubt became a question each juror had to answer individually. 12 people said yes. Appeals. Courts agreed. The system concluded that justice had been served, but justice, even when served, leaves residue. Questions that linger, grief that never fully dissipates. Communities changed by violence they couldn't prevent. Marshallville learned to live with the memory. Parents taught their children to be careful, to watch for strangers, to trust instinct when something feels wrong. The festival continues every summer because surrendering to fear would be its own form of defeat. Night settles completely now. Stars emerge above the memorial park. The sugar maple becomes shadow among shadows. A maintenance worker locks the park gate, checks that everything is secure, glances at the memorial plaque, as he does every evening. He wasn't living in Marshallville in 1982, moved here a decade ago for work, but he knows the story. Everyone who lives here knows it. He wonders sometimes if Krista haunts this place. Not in any supernatural sense, just in the way memories haunt spaces where tragedy occurred. The way absence becomes presence through remembering. The worker walks to his truck, drives home through streets that look nothing like they did 40 years ago. New businesses, different houses, the landscape transformed while the memory remained frozen. That's what cold cases do. They become fixed points, moments preserved in amber, even as the world around them evolves. Krista Harrison will always be 11 years old, always collecting cans at a summer festival, always smiling that trusting smile. Time stopped for her in ways it continued for everyone else. The investigation that followed became part of Marshallville's identity, the town where a girl was taken, where a community searched, where justice eventually, painfully, slowly arrived. 40 years later, the arrest still shocks when people learn the details. A city planner, a respected professional, evil hiding in plain sight. The revelation never stops being disturbing, never stops making people question their assumptions about safety and appearance, and the masks predators wear. In courtrooms across America, prosecutors still cite the Harrison case when defending fiber evidence. Defense attorneys still question its reliability. The debate continues even as DNA has largely superseded older forensic methods. The case exists in legal textbooks, in forensic science curricula, in true crime documentaries that dissect every detail for audiences hungry to understand how darkness operates. But at its core, beyond the technical evidence and legal arguments, the story remains heartbreakingly simple. A child went to a festival on a summer afternoon. She never came home. A family's world shattered in the time it took a van to pull away. A community lost its innocence and never fully recovered it. And justice, when it finally arrived, brought closure, but not healing. Answers but not peace. The fiber evidence that convicted Robert Buell represented the best science available at the time. Whether it met an absolute standard of certainty is a question that depends on how certainty is defined. 12 jurors believed it did. Courts agreed. Buell died maintaining his innocence. The Harrison family died believing justice had been served. Truth lives somewhere in that tension, between evidence and doubt, between punishment and uncertainty, between the hunger for justice and the weight of finality. What remains undisputed is the loss. Krista Harrison deserved to grow up, to graduate, to fall in love, to live the full span of years that violence stole from her. The memorial tree grows in her absence, branches reaching upward like prayers, like memory refusing to fade, like the stubborn insistence that even when justice comes late, it still matters, that remembering matters, that speaking names matters, that refusing to let time erase tragedy matters. The night deepens over Marshallville. Houses glow with television light. Families settle into evening routines, ordinary rhythms of life that continue regardless of history. 40 years hasn't erased what happened, but it has provided distance. The kind of distance that allows grief to soften from raw wound into aching scar. Younger generations know the story secondhand, through parents, through teachers, through true crime podcasts that present the facts with dramatic music and careful pacing. They learn about stranger danger, about being aware of surroundings, about the importance of memorizing license plates and describing faces, and trusting instinct when something feels wrong. The lessons born from Krista's death ripple outward through time. Amber alerts, forensic advances, community vigilance, small changes that might save other children from similar fates. Whether that constitutes meaning or merely consolation is impossible to say. The memorial tree stands as testament, not to justice accomplished, not to healing complete, but to memory preserved, to a community that refused to forget. The plaque bears witness. The annual moment of silence speaks her name. The story passes from generation to generation, and somewhere in the tension between remembering and moving forward, between grief and grace, life continues. Children play beneath branches that shelter memory. Parents watch more carefully than their parents did. The festival fills with laughter each summer, despite the shadow that never quite lifts. Time moves forward. It always does, but it carries the past with it, particularly the parts too painful to fully release. The camera pulls back, rising above the memorial park, above Marshallville, above the small Ohio town where laughter once mixed with kettle corn sweetness on a summer afternoon. From this distance, the town looks peaceful, lights scattered like fallen stars, streets quiet, the ordinary beauty of a community at rest. Nothing visible from this height suggests the tragedy that unfolded here 4 decades ago. Nothing marks the spot where innocence shattered, where a family's worst nightmare became reality. But the memory persists, in archives and textbooks, in podcast episodes and documentary films, in the minds of those who lived through it, and the hearts of those who learned about it later. Krista Harrison's story became part of the larger narrative about justice, doubt, and the evolution of forensic science. It became a case study in what conviction means when absolute certainty remains elusive. The fiber evidence was extraordinary for its time, microscopic matches across 12 separate samples, probability so remote that scientific confidence approached practical certainty. But approached is not achieved. And in cases where life and death hang in balance, That distinction matters. 40 years later, the questions persist alongside the answers. The doubt exists alongside the conviction. The grief continues alongside the justice. Robert Buell was executed for Krista's murder based on evidence that 12 jurors found convincing beyond reasonable doubt. Whether history will judge that verdict as correct depends partly on how certainty is measured and partly on faith in systems designed by humans, implemented by humans, and therefore inevitably imperfect. What remains certain is the loss. What remains certain is that a girl who loved summer and trusted people and collected cans for a fair she would never attend deserved better than the fate that found her. What remains certain is that her family carried unbearable weight for decades, that her mother kept a locket, that her father stood outside courtrooms waiting for justice that felt both essential and insufficient. What remains certain is that communities never fully recover from such violations, that innocence once lost cannot be restored, that fear becomes part of the landscape even when years pass and perpetrators die. And what remains certain is that memory matters, that speaking names matters, that marking places matters, that teaching new generations matters, that fighting for justice, however imperfect, matters more than surrendering to despair. Season after season, it transforms. Leaves bud in spring, provide shade in summer, turn brilliant red in autumn, fall in winter. The cycle continues, life persists, time moves forward. But the tree remains, a living monument to a life stolen, a reminder of what was lost and what endures. In the gathering darkness, wind moves through its branches. The sound might be mistaken for whispers, for voices from memory, for echoes of laughter that once filled summer air. The branches reach upward still, toward stars emerging in the deepening night, toward sky that holds no answers but witnesses everything, reaching like questions that refuse silence, like grief that transforms but never disappears, like memory that time cannot erase.